Hello and welcome to another Tales from the Front video. Today we're going to be talking about REST APIs and how to use those to get all the data you need. This is a topic that I see routinely when I'm helping out on the Power BI community, which I definitely encourage you to participate in to learn more and maybe help some others once you get a little more experienced. REST APIs, I see lots of variations on the theme where people are wanting to pass maybe a column of values into a REST API, or they want to pull more rows than each call makes, so you need to iterate through those. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to do both of those things. So this is again, this is done in Power Query, so this is another M video, and I would call this an intermediate level video. There's one part at the end that's maybe a little more advanced, but this is overall intermediate. Here's all my contact info. If you like these videos and want to be notified of future ones, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. All right, so let's talk about our scenario. And in this case, a user has a REST API data source, and one of two issues is making them stuck. And the most common one I see is, hey, the data source maybe has 1,000 rows, but I can only get 100 rows per call, and so I need to iterate through that and get all 1,000 rows. So we'll cover that. And also it can be, hey, I've got a table of values. It could be, cities that I want to send to the Google API and look at get directions or distances or anything. And you want to pass each of the values in a row in a column over to the REST API to get the data. So again, before we start writing any code, let's just talk about the needed logic that we need. So again, we're going to be passing, either parameters or just values from a column into REST API calls. And if we need more data than each call allows, then we can do it, take it in bytes and get chunks of data back and get the maximum we can per call, and then append those all together. So in this one, we're going to make our web calls with web.contents. Getting the response in Json is very typical, so we'll use json.document, and then to iterate through, we're going to use list.numbers as our approach there. And with these kinds of things, each REST API is a little different, so you need to look at the documentation for your REST API to get the syntax that's needed, and you're going to need some way to authenticate. A very common one is to have a key that you actually put into the web call, and that's the one I'll demonstrate today, but there's other variations on that as well, and we'll come back to the key points at the end. So let's just look at the example we're going to do. It turns out that Giphy has a free REST API that we could use. So you just sign up with your email, and you can get an account there and get a key to be able to make calls to do searches or do other things, but to search for GIF. So this is a table, and we'll go through making this where I searched for the word hamburger and got a bunch of GIFs back related to hamburgers. And so you can get the data back, and then hopefully in Power BI you can format a column as a image URL, and then it can actually show up. I can go retrieve the picture or GIF that's at that URL and display it in a visual. Okay. So I said you got to look at the REST API documentation to get the syntax and to get a key. So I'll just have the Giphy site here. And again, this is a real user-friendly API. There's lots of good documentation on it, but again, this is just representative of lots of APIs that are out there. And so with this one, you can go ahead and get your key. And once you get a key, you want to keep that private. I'm actually showing my key in this video, and I'm going to update this or change this right after this video is over. But this one lets you to put in with real user-friendly things to put in, and I say I'm going to use their search endpoint off of the API, and I'm going to search for the word hamburger, and there's some other terms here. Limit is the number of rows to bring back per call. Offset we'll talk about more, but it's any rows to skip before that. And this one has some other ones. You can only search for G-rated stuff, or other things, and I'm going to search in English. And so when you do all that, it actually makes the syntax for you. And so this is really convenient just to go ahead and copy this, and then we can go back over to Power BI. And notice again, this already has my API key embedded in it, as well as these terms that are put in there. And so this is the syntax I'm talking about. And this is very common to see all of the terms. So typically you'll see the URL, then you'll see the question mark, which means I'm going to start passing parameters after the question mark. And then each of these things is a different parameter, and the parameters are very commonly separated by ampersands. And so this is a very common syntax that you'll see. Other APIs have different terms for the same types of things. So very common, instead of limit, you'll see $top, and for offset, you'll see $skip. And so again, see the documentation for your API. But this, you can actually send the request, and you'll see the response here. And so this is actually what Power BI is going to get back. You don't have to worry about interpreting the JSON, because Power BI interface will make it real easy for you. So let's go back over to Power BI. And then if we just say, so say I've got a URL that I want to make a call with, I can do the web connector, and all I'm going to do is paste that whole string in there. If this is the first time doing it, you'll get prompted for what type of authentication to use. And since we're embedding the key inside the call, we can choose an anonymous source. I've already done it with this file already. And so I'm not going to get prompted for that, but you will, and just choose anonymous if you're embedding the key inside your web call. So now this will open up the query editor, and we'll see our response. And what you're going to see is that Power BI tries to do a lot of work for you, and tries to expand all that JSON code for you. And in my case, I decided not to, because I don't need all of the fields. There's just a couple of fields that I want there. So again, this is the one that we just created with that URL, and you can see it added a whole bunch of steps where it expanded all of the potential data coming back in that response. And really what I want is, I just want the title of the GIFs that it finds, as well as the URL back to the GIF itself. So if I go up to this source step, and I'll actually just delete until end here to get rid of everything else, just to show you what we get back here. We actually get three big parts to this. The data is where we're going to find all the stuff of interest, but there's also some other good info here. Hopefully you know this trick, that if you click to the right of any of these things, instead of clicking on the link directly, you can get a preview of what's there. And we'll use this in a second, but it tells you basically how many things came in this particular call. Remember, our limit on this one was set to 25. How many things are there, right? So that tells you how many times we'd have to get 25. We'd have to get 25 a bunch of times to get up to 711. So we'll do that, and then we didn't skip any rows, so that's 0. And so basically with Power BI, you can just start drilling down into this. And so I clicked it, and so now we get 25 rows of data. Each one's a record. I can convert that to a table. Okay. And then I can expand this, and then I can start getting the data I want. Usually you uncheck this use original column prefix, and I know from experience, and again, you'll have to dig through your response there to see where the data is that you want, but I know I want the title, and I want this images. And I'll go ahead and expand that. And then images is another embedded record in there. And so again, having played with this before, I know I want this downsized one. I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to expand this one more time and just get the URL. Okay. So at this point, I could then convert these to text, and I could load this table. And once I get to once this is loaded, I can then highlight this column, categorize it as an image URL, and then I can start making visuals, and you'll see the GIFs like I showed before. Okay, so that's an example of just how to get started with this. So now I'm going to show you some ones that I've already made to show you how to sort of take this to the next level. Okay, so I'm going to delete this one. And I'll show you this first one, which is pretty much the same thing. You get the same output there. Again, it's using that same full string there um, to make the call. All right. And so one good thing I recommend when you start working with REST APIs, if you're going to be making a bunch of calls, it can be good to put part of it in a parameter. This is not required, but it may save you some time. And so basically what I've done is I've put most of the URL into this. So you see the key is there, the rating, the language is there, and I don't have the query part of it. Okay, and so I'm going to add that in and append it to this string, but at least I won't have to put this all the time. I've saved it one time, and now I've got this base URL that has my authentication in it. I could include or exclude these other parameters, but that's there. All right, so the first thing I see out on the community is people have a list of values and they want to pass all of them to a REST API. So what I've done here is I just made a, enter data, and I put in these 3 words, and I'm going to pass each of them into the web call to get the data back. All right, and so I put in those. I think I changed it to text. And then all I'm doing is I'm going to add a custom column. Okay, and if you look at this custom column, this is the same thing we had in the source step of the previous one, except, so I've got, json.document, web.contents, and I'm using that base URL and key, which again has everything but the query parameter. And then all I'm doing is using an ampersand to concatenate the query term, and so I'm loading the query term from the search term column. And so this in square brackets is how I reference that column. And so I'm saying, hey, take this text string that is in that parameter, concatenate it with ampersand q. So notice that the ampersand here has to be inside the quotes because it needs to be in that string. And so q equals, and then I'm just appending this the value from this column, which is already a text. So we end up with one text string that then we go out and get the web contents, and then that comes back as a JSON response, and JSON.document opens that up for us. And again, with each of these, we get a record. And so just like before, we can then expand this and, get the just the data part, for example. And so basically that's what I did. Is all those same steps as I showed before, and expanded, downsize, change types. And so now I've got my search term, title, and then I've got a URL to all those things. So I've gotten 150 rows of data, 50 rows each for those 3 terms, because in this case I didn't specify the offset, or sorry, the limit, and so the limit has a maximum of 50, and so that's what it defaults to. You can get 50 per call. All right, and so again, that's how you go from, I can pass it a column of values, and all I'm doing is adding a custom column with a web contents function. Again, it's a good practice to use that as a parameter and pass that in. So all I'm doing is concatenating things and putting it in a function that goes out and makes the web call. So it's pretty easy to do. All right. So let's talk about the other common scenario that I see is, notice this one only returns 50, but if I go do a search, you saw in one case it had like 700 some. And so we need to go out and get that in 50 row increments, right? Because we can only get 50 per call. And so to do that, there's, and again, you look at your API documentation as well, you can also go out and get the count of things before you start making calls to see how many calls you need to make. And so remember we talked before that in that initial call, so in this case we're searching for hamburger again, and if I look at the other data that's returned, if I preview this pagination one, you can see that there was a thing here that showed that there were, this response only gave 25 because I did have limit equals 25 in that call. I could have left it off and we would have got 50. But it told me there were 881 total that met the search criteria of hamburger. Okay, So we can actually use that. And so if we navigate further, if we just click on that record and then drill down, so let me just do that just so you see what I'm talking about, because it kind of skips a step there. So we'll go to record, we'll navigate into that pagination record. We'll get to this, and it shows the three values inside that record. And if I just right click here and do drill down, I can actually return the number here. Okay, and all right, and so then what I can do is use the offset parameter. And so if I go here, so now I know there's 881, right? So what I can do is I can create a list of numbers using the list.numbers function. And I want to start it at 0 because I don't want to skip any of the beginning the first time. I want to start at 0. And basically what I can do is take my total count, divide that by 50, and that'll tell me how many calls I need to make. And then this third parameter of list.numbers is how big a step to take between of them. So make a list of numbers starting at 0, give me this many numbers in the list, and separate them by 50. And so if you had a web call that did 1,000, you could put 1,000 there. But in general, you can calculate how many calls to make. And so this makes a list of numbers separated by 50. Remember, we had 881. So if I start at 850 and add 50, I'm going to more than cover that. And so therefore, I'm going to get all my data, right? So then we convert that to a table, change it, and then very similar to before, we're going to add a custom column. And in this case, we're going to hard code in the limit of 50. We know that's the limit because we looked at our documentation or we experimented with this. And I'm going to add in this offset term. So again, I'm starting with the base URL, add in the offset limit of 50, and then I'm going to use the value from column 1 as my offset. So in this call, it's going to start at 0. In this call, it's going to start at 50 and get the next 50 rows. This one's going to start at 100 and get the next 50 rows, right? So at the end, when I start expanding this, which I do in these steps here, I end up getting, and I do the same step as before, so I'm not going to cover those, but I end up getting all the rows. And this one, I think there was a difference in one of the search terms. Maybe I didn't search in English or rating of G, but that's why it's not the 881. But you get the idea. All right. So those are the two main scenarios that I see out there: wanting to pass a value to a URL for a REST API, or iterating through something where you can only get so many rows, but there's more data out there than you can get in one call. So those are two solutions to those common scenarios. A little bit more advanced, it's also possible to create a function out of this as well. So say you use a certain API all the time and you want to create a function. It's also possible to create a function where basically all you need to do is pass it a search word. And if I just open the advanced editor here, this basically does the equivalent of all the steps I showed you, where it says, okay, what's the word that I'm looking for, and then it goes out and first goes into the pagination part of the response to get the total count, and then it knows how many to do, and then it makes the numbers, and then for each number it goes out and makes the call. So this is basically all these steps combined into one function. All right, and so what you can do with that is basically, you can go to this and again start with a table of values there, but in this case it won't just bring back 50 rows for each, which is the limit. It'll do that whole function. So if there's 1,000 of these and 600 of those and 400 of those, it'll go out and do as many calls there as necessary for that search word. Okay, so again, this isn't required. Most people could stop at the earlier stuff and either pass the individual values in each row, or could increment through a certain web call to get all your data. Most people could stop there, but again, if you do this all the time, or basically functions are really powerful and you can do lots of good stuff with them. And so once you create that function, you basically would then just have a step where you invoke the custom function. So you just go to add column, invoke custom function, and then choose this FX Giphy that I created here, tell it you want the search word to come from this column, and then you'll basically get a table back for each of these words. Okay, and then if we load that table, which I had done earlier, right, you can actually get quite a few rows there. In this case, it was 10,000 rows. So again, once I created the function, all I had to do was pass it the 3 words, and I got a whole bunch of data back for that. Okay, so that's just a quick run through of things you can do with REST APIs just to make your life easier. And I'll just sum up here with some key points there. So again, hopefully you've seen that you can pass values, whether they're numbers for like an offset or a skip, or text to be used as part of a search query or for some other parameter that's in the REST API. Again, make sure you look at the documentation for your API. This one uses limit and offset, but more common is to use $top and $skip. And again, look at your documentation to see what the expected syntax is. Again, you can first get a count of the number of rows and then turn around and use that to decide to limit it so that it only makes the minimum number of calls that are necessary to get all your data. If you want to get more advanced with it, you can create a function that does all that in one step. And again, if you do get a key like this one here, make sure you don't share that with others. And again, I'm going to replace this one as soon as I'm done making the video. Okay. So again, hopefully you enjoyed this and it can help you get going faster. And please go ahead and subscribe to these videos if you want to see more like this.